There is a $5 fix sitting in your kitchen cabinet right now that pest control companies have quietly hoped you'd never find out about. No traps, no poison, no monthly service contracts. Just a rag, a few common household ingredients, and about 10 minutes of your time. Every year, American homeowners spend billions, with a B, on professional extermination services. Repeat customers, recurring infestations, the same rodents in the same walls, season after season. And here's the thing. Nobody in that industry is rushing to tell you. Some of the most effective rodent deterrents on Earth cost almost nothing, and you can apply them yourself today, right at the entry points that matter most. Now, the moment you start researching this, you'll notice something interesting. Pest control companies and their affiliated experts are very quick to call these methods unproven. They love that word, unproven. It sounds scientific, it sounds authoritative. It's designed to make you put down the peppermint oil and pick up the phone. But unproven doesn't mean ineffective. It means nobody with a financial interest in the outcome has paid for the study. In the next few minutes, we're going to break down exactly what the soaked rag method is, what the actual science says about smell-based rodent deterrents, and why the people most motivated to discredit it happen to be the same ones charging you $200 a visit. So before we get into the method itself, we need to understand the enemy. Because here's what most homeowners get wrong. They treat a rodent infestation like it's a single event. You see a mouse, you set a trap, you catch the mouse, problem solved. But that's not how this works. That's never how this works. Mice and rats are not wandering in from the wilderness randomly. They are following invisible highways that have been established over generations. Rodents communicate through scent. They leave pheromone trails along baseboards, through wall gaps, underneath door frames. And those trails don't disappear when the animal does. The next mouse that comes along, and there will be a next mouse, picks up that scent and follows it like a GPS signal, right back to the same entry points, the same food sources, the same nesting spots inside your walls. This is why the trap and release cycle never ends. You're removing individual animals while leaving the infrastructure of the infestation completely intact. Now add to this the biology. A single female mouse can produce somewhere between 5 and 10 litters per year, each litter 5 to 6 pups. Those pups reach reproductive maturity in about 6 weeks. You do that math and you realize very quickly that catching mice one at a time is roughly equivalent to bailing out a bathtub with a thimble while the faucet is still running. Rats are slower to reproduce but far more intelligent. They are neophobic by nature, genuinely suspicious of new objects in their environment, including traps. Pest control professionals know this. It's why they often pre-bait traps without setting them for days, just to get the rats comfortable. That's a level of adaptive behavior that should give you pause. And here's the kicker. Neither mice nor rats need much of an opening to get inside. A mouse can squeeze through a gap roughly the size of a dime. A rat needs only a 1/4 inch more than that. Your foundation, your utility penetrations, your aging weather stripping, these aren't minor vulnerabilities. They're open doors. So any real solution has to start at the foundation. It has to disrupt that scent trail before the next scout ever makes it inside. So here's where things get interesting. Because while pest control companies have been charging hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars for treatments, a growing number of homeowners have been quietly experimenting with something that costs almost nothing, and word has been spreading. Forums, home improvement communities, neighborhood Facebook groups. People are sharing the same basic story. They soaked a rag, they placed it at the foundation, and the mice stopped coming. The method itself is almost disarmingly simple. You take a cloth, an old rag, a piece of fabric, sometimes even a cotton ball scaled up, and you saturate it with a strongly scented substance. Peppermint oil is the most commonly mentioned, but people are also reporting success with ammonia, with eucalyptus oil, with a product called predator urine, and in some cases with a mixture of cayenne pepper and white vinegar. Once the rag is thoroughly soaked, you place it near the foundation of your home. Entry points, corners, utility line penetrations, crawl space vents, anywhere that a scout mouse might be probing for a way in. Some people refresh the rag every few days. Others swear by leaving it longer and letting the scent build up in the soil around it. Now you might be wondering, where did this even come from? And the honest answer is that it didn't come from a laboratory. It came from observation. Homeowners noticed that certain smells seemed to make rodents turn around. They experimented. They told their neighbors. The idea accumulated a kind of folk credibility over time, passed from one frustrated homeowner to the next, person to person, the way practical knowledge often does before it ever gets a clinical trial. And the claims aren't subtle. People aren't saying the rag slowed the mice down a little. They're saying infestations they had dealt with for months cleared up in a matter of weeks. Some say days. Families describe checking their traps expecting the usual grim results and finding nothing. No new activity, no fresh droppings. Just silence along the baseboards where the scratching used to be. That's a strong claim. So the obvious question becomes, is there anything behind it? And here's where things get genuinely interesting. Because when you actually dig into the science, not the pest control industry's talking points, but the underlying biology of how rodents process smell, the idea that a scent-soaked rag could drive them away doesn't sound nearly as far-fetched as exterminators want you to believe. Mice and rats are not like you and me. Their sense of smell operates on a completely different level. Where humans have roughly 6 million olfactory receptors, a mouse has closer to 12 million. Rats do even better than that. Their entire survival strategy, finding food, detecting predators, communicating with other members of their colony, is built around scent. It is the primary language of their world, which means that if you introduce the right smell into their environment, you're not just creating a mild inconvenience. You're speaking directly to the most powerful sense they have. Now, certain smells are documented to trigger aversion responses in rodents. Predator urine is the most well-researched. When a mouse detects the chemical compounds found in the urine of a cat, a fox, or a ferret, something happens in its brain that isn't a learned response. It's hardwired. Studies have actually identified a specific protein, a compound called 2-phenylethylamine, found in carnivore waste, that activates fear circuits in rodents, even in animals that have never encountered a predator in their lives. It's instinct at the chemical level. Peppermint oil works through a different mechanism. The active compound is menthol, and in high concentrations, it essentially overwhelms the rodent's olfactory system. Imagine someone holding ammonia directly under your nose. You're not going to stand there and think about it. You move. That's roughly the experience a mouse has when it encounters a heavily saturated peppermint source at close range. Ammonia itself mimics the scent of predator urine, triggering similar avoidance instincts. Eucalyptus, clove oil, and certain sulfur compounds have also shown varying degrees of rodent deterrent effects in controlled settings. The honest nuance here is that these effects are real but conditional. Concentration matters enormously. Placement matters. Whether the animal is desperate enough, hungry enough, cold enough to push through the discomfort anyway matters too. A mildly scented cotton ball sitting 20 feet from a food source probably isn't moving anyone. But a heavily saturated barrier placed directly at an entry point? That's a different conversation entirely. That's working with the animal's biology rather than against it. So here's where things get interesting. Because if these compounds genuinely trigger fear responses in rodents, if the science is real, if the instincts are hardwired, then why does the pest control industry keep insisting there's nothing to see here? Why does every exterminator website, every industry-backed article, every expert roundup land on the same two words? Unproven, ineffective? Let's think about that for a second. The pest control industry in the United States alone generates somewhere north of $9 billion a year. $9 billion. And that number depends entirely on repeat customers. It depends on the quarterly service contract, the annual inspection, the follow-up treatment, the phone call you make in a panic at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night because you heard something in the walls again. Now ask yourself, what happens to that business model if people start handling rodent prevention themselves? With a rag and a bottle of peppermint oil? To be fair, the industry isn't entirely wrong when they say the soaked rag method is unproven. In the strict scientific sense, there haven't been large-scale, peer-reviewed, double-blind trials conducted specifically on the foundation barrier technique as homeowners practice it. That's true. But here's what's also true. A lack of formal study is not the same thing as evidence that something doesn't work. Those are two completely different statements, and the industry knows it. They blur that line deliberately. There's also a licensing and liability angle here. Pest control operators are regulated. They're trained on approved methods. Recommending an approach that falls outside certified protocols creates professional and legal exposure for them. It's safer, professionally speaking, to call something unproven than to endorse it. And then there's this. The compounds that have actually shown rodent deterrent effects in research settings, predator urine analogs, menthol derivatives, certain sulfur compounds, some of them are being studied for commercial repellent applications by companies who want to patent them and sell them back to you. The science isn't unproven, it's just not yet packaged in something you have to buy from them. So let's talk about how to actually do this correctly. Because there's a right way and a wrong way, And the difference matters more than most people realize. Start with your materials. You want pure peppermint oil, not the blended kind, not the aromatherapy dilution sitting in your bathroom cabinet. Pure, concentrated peppermint oil. You can also use a combination approach. Peppermint oil paired with either clove oil or eucalyptus oil. Both have shown irritant properties to rodents in controlled observations. Some homeowners add a few drops of predator urine concentrate, which you can find at hunting supply stores. Cotton rags work best, something absorbent that holds the liquid rather than just letting it run off. Now saturation matters. You're not lightly dabbing these rags, you're soaking them. Each rag should be visibly wet, heavily saturated, and you should be able to smell it strongly from a foot or two away. If you can barely detect the scent, a mouse won't be impressed either. The placement is everything. Walk the entire perimeter of your home's foundation. Look for where the foundation meets the ground, gaps around utility entry points, basement window wells, crawl space vents. Anywhere there's a transition between your structure and the soil. These are the corridors. These are where the rags go. Space them roughly every 3 to 4 feet along vulnerable stretches. Pay extra attention to corners. Rodents hug walls and follow edges. A corner is essentially a highway intersection for mice. Double up there. Now here's what most people skip and then wonder why it stopped working after a week. You have to refresh these rags. Rain dilutes them. Heat evaporates them. Sun breaks down the compounds. Every 5 to 7 days, go back out and resaturate. If you've had rain, go sooner. Keep a small spray bottle with your oil mixture nearby so the refresh takes 2 minutes instead of becoming a whole project. Seal what you can while you're out there. The rags create a deterrent boundary, but a deterrent and a physical seal working together? That's when you start seeing real results. So that's the theory. That's the method laid out step by step. But what actually happens when real people try this on real homes with real rodent problems? Because that's the part that matters. Take Sandra from rural Ohio. She'd been dealing with mice in her basement for 3 consecutive winters. She'd tried snap traps, she'd tried the ultrasonic plugins. She'd even paid for a professional treatment that ran her close to $400. The mice came back every single time. She started doing the foundation rag method in late September using peppermint oil as her primary compound, and she reported that by the 2nd week she'd stopped finding fresh droppings near her water heater entirely. 2 winters later, she says she still does her refresh routine every 5 days and hasn't seen a single mouse inside since. Then there's Marcus, a homeowner in the Pacific Northwest, who was skeptical enough that he actually ran a side-by-side test on his own property. He treated the east and south sides of his foundation with the soaked rag barrier. He left the north and west sides untreated as a control. Within 3 weeks, he was finding activity, chewed insulation, droppings, a disturbed crawlspace vent, exclusively on the untreated sides. He called that pretty compelling. Not every story is a clean victory, though. Several homeowners noted that the method worked well for mice, but seemed less effective against larger rats, particularly Norway rats that were already established in burrows close to the foundation. Others found that consistency was the real obstacle. Missing a refresh cycle after a heavy rain seemed to reset their progress. What these stories share is a pattern. When people apply the method correctly, maintain it consistently, and combine it with even basic physical sealing, they tend to see results. When they do it halfway, the results are halfway. That part shouldn't surprise anyone. But here's where honesty matters more than a good sales pitch for any method, including this one. The soaked rag barrier is a tool. It is not a magic wall. And there are situations where it simply will not be enough on its own. The first red flag is volume. If you are already seeing multiple mice inside your home every single day, or finding fresh droppings in several rooms consistently, you are not dealing with a prevention problem anymore. You are dealing with an active infestation. At that point, the foundation barrier is still worth doing, but you need to address what is already living inside the structure at the same time. Repelling new arrivals means nothing if a colony has already moved in. The second red flag is structural damage. If rodents have chewed through your sill plate, compromised your crawlspace insulation, or found their way into your wall cavities, no smell-based deterrent is going to undo that. Those entry points need physical repair. Expanding foam, steel wool packed tight before sealing, and hardware cloth over vents are non-negotiable at that stage. The third flag is Norway rats specifically. Several people in our story section touched on this. Established Norway rat burrows near a foundation represent a level of commitment from the animal that scent alone rarely overcomes. These are diggers, not wanderers. They are harder to deter and may require trapping or professional intervention to fully eliminate. Your backup plan should always include a ceiling audit, basic trap placement during the reset period, and an honest assessment of how bad things actually are before you start. Know what you are walking into. The method works best as a shield, not a rescue operation. Here is the thing that nobody in the pest control industry is going to put on a billboard. You have more power over this problem than they want you to believe. Not unlimited power, not magic, but real, practical leverage that costs almost nothing and works when you apply it correctly and at the right time. Everything we have covered tonight points to the same conclusion. The soaked rag method, the foundation barrier technique, the scent layering approach, none of it is revolutionary science. It is just paying attention to what rodents actually respond to and using that knowledge before they make your home their home. Prevention is almost always cheaper, faster, and less stressful than remediation. That is not a controversial statement. That is just math. The reason this information feels like a secret is because there is no money in it. A bottle of peppermint oil and a roll of hardware cloth do not generate service contracts. Empowered homeowners who seal their own foundations and reset their own perimeters do not need quarterly visits. So the information gets quietly dismissed, labeled unproven, pushed to the bottom of the search results. Now you have it anyway. Use it early, use it consistently. Combine the scent barrier with physical sealing, keep your yard clean, and check your foundation twice a year. Do all of that, and you put yourself in a position where calling a professional becomes a choice rather than an emergency. If this gave you something useful, pass it along. Share it with a neighbor, a friend, a family member who just spotted something scurrying along the baseboard. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, because we are just getting started on the things the industry would rather you not know. Drop your questions and your results in the comments. This community grows when you show up in it. Now go check your foundation. Tonight is a better time than tomorrow.